guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah. I read mostly historical fiction, fantasy, and romance, and today we're going to go over all of the books that I read in the month of February. In February, I managed to read a total of 8 books, which is insane considering February was probably, I think it is the shortest month of the year, and I honestly did not expect it out of myself. Partially, I think it was due to the fact that I was almost through 2 books when I started the month, so that kind of helped. And I listened to an audiobook, which also helped. It was my first audiobook I've ever listened to. So in terms of genre, I read 2 romance, 2 historical fiction, 2 fantasy, 1 nonfic, and then 1 book that's classed as horror, though I didn't think it was particularly scary. In terms of format, I read 6 books in print, I read 1 on my Kindle, and then as I said, I listened to 1 audiobook. All of my ratings coalesced and it came out to an average of 3.81, which means that I technically had a better reading month in February than I did in January, even though I felt honestly like this was a bad reading month for me. The numbers are saying something different. Do with that what you will. Without further ado, let's get into the actual books. The first book that I read in the month of February, like I said, was one that I kind of started reading in January and was almost through when I started the month in February, and that was The Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the 3rd book in the Day of Abad trilogy. I talked about this book in my last reading wrap up. This is a fantasy series set in 18th century Cairo. We are following Nari. Nari is a con woman. She's grown up in Cairo alone, basically. She's had no family. She has very few friends. And so she's had to con in order to survive. And during one of her cons, she accidentally summons a djinn named Dara. Dara suspects that she has some hidden heritage that would be really important to a magical city called Day of Abad, so he whisks her away to that, and she is thrust into a world of magic and court politics and simmering tensions, all of which she has to navigate very, very quickly. Obviously, this is the 3rd book. I can't tell you anything about this 3rd book without spoiling the previous 2. I gave this 5 stars. I give every book in the series 5 stars. This has quickly become one of my favorite fantasy series that I've ever read. In fact, this series changed the definition of what I think a good fantasy series is. This was in many ways perfect to me. I love the characters so much. I think S.A. Chakraborty has a masterful grasp on character work and the ability to make characters empathetic even when they're doing something bad, the ability to make them complex and still lovable, the ability to have them have relationships with each other and for them to feel meaningful even when they're not romantic, which is something that I feel like a lot of the books that I've read previously struggle with, is making me care about the friendships. I love a fantasy where the world feels lived in, where it feels like it has a history. I would highly recommend this series. If you love a political fantasy, highly recommend this series. If you just love epic fantasy in general, I would highly recommend this series. Like, I'm begging people to read it because I feel like this isn't talked about enough, and maybe I'm just not in those spaces online, but I just don't see enough content. This just doesn't get enough hype, and I truly feel like this is just a work of art. This is a work of art, and I think about these characters daily. Highly, 10 out of 10 recommend. The next book that I read in the month of February was actually on my January TBR, and I just didn't get around to finishing it in January, and that was The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. Now, this book actually has kind of interesting lore with me because I almost unhauled this book, like literally pulled it off the shelf, put it somewhere else, was gonna get rid of it, send it to the free little library or whatever, and then I saw so many videos about how good the series was and how everyone needs to read it, and it was this deluge of videos about how good it was, and so I felt compelled to put it back on the shelf. All right, maybe I'll get to it one day, and now here we are. My initial complaints with this book when I DNF'd it the first time was that I couldn't get into the writing style. There was this one garlic farticus joke that sticks with me to today that I think about and I still don't love, but it's this small thing in this otherwise amazing story. I gave this book 5 stars, by the way. If you don't know what this book is about, this book follows the women of one of Pompeii's most well-known brothels. Obviously, we're talking about ancient Pompeii, back before Mount Vesuvius erupted. And these women are slaves, okay? They're prostitutes, but they're slaves. And so we're following primarily Amara. Amara didn't grow up a slave. She was sold into slavery in her teenage years. And so she really chafes at this lifestyle in a way some of the other women don't. And her primary goal throughout this book is to get out of this situation, to find a way out. And so that's the journey that we're following, but we're also following kind of a journey of sisterhood, which sounds so cringy, but it's kind of true. We're following these women who deal with a situation that they're in very differently. Like, they're all in the same situation, but the way that they process it is very different. The way that they deal with it is very different, and they are just different as people. And yet, even in conflict, even in competition, these women are still there for each other, and it's just such a beautiful read that it almost, words escape me trying to talk about it. So, like I said, the writing style does take some acclimation. It is very blunt, it's pointed, it's not flowery at all, but I think when you read the book and you look back on it, it's an accurate reflection of what the themes of the story are. Whether you're a newbie historical fiction person or someone who's very well seasoned in the genre, I definitely think that you should read this book. This was 5 out of 5 stars for me. The next 3 books that I read in the month of February, I actually filmed all of it in a reading vlog, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them, but we will go through them very quickly. That said, the third book that I read in the month of February was The Mayor of Maxwell Street by Avery Cunningham. This is a historical fiction set in 1920 Chicago, right in the midst of the Jim Crow era, and we follow 2 main characters, one of whom is the daughter of the wealthiest Black family in America. Her name is Nellie, and Nellie kind of has 2 diverging paths in front of her. On one hand, her parents want her to marry a rich man, become a debutante, really ingratiate herself into society, and create generational wealth for her family. And on the other hand, she wants to become a journalist. She wants a career in journalism. And in the pursuit of her journalism dream, she takes on the challenge of finding out who this mysterious underground figure is called the Mayor of Maxwell Street. No one knows anything about him, but he's managed to corral all of the underground mobs of Chicago and control them. And so her task is to kind of create an expose on him. I really can't tell you more about the story because I really don't understand what the story was. If you watch the reading vlog, you kind of know my full thoughts on this, but this was really messy. This was all over the place. The plot was all over the place, the characters were all over the place, the romance was all over the place. Nothing about this worked for me outside of the historical aspects, which I really feel were well executed, well researched, and really gave me a more nuanced perspective on the Jim Crow era in America. But other than that, Ellie was getting on my nerves every moment of the book. The start was slow, the romance had no chemistry. It was actually a love triangle, and I was rooting for the other guy. And clearly that's not what the author wanted. And the actual mystery, the actual meat of the story, it was there, and then it wasn't, and then it was back again, and then we had this shock ending, and I was like, wait, what? Like, okay, like it was shocking, but it didn't make sense. I ended up giving this book 2 out of 5 stars. However, it was on my February TBR, so that is a plus. We got one done. That's still better than what we did in January. The next 2 books that I'm going to talk about were also in that reading vlog, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. They were also in the same series, and that was Twisted Hate by Anna Wong and Twisted Lies by Anna Wong. This is the 3rd and 4th book in the Twisted series. This is actually the final book, so we finished a series. Applause all around. I gave Twisted Hate 2.5 stars, and I gave Twisted Lies 3.5 stars. I have some very mixed feelings about these books. When it comes to Twisted Hate, we are following Jules and Josh. Both are connected to the main character of the first book. Jules is the best friend, Josh is the brother. They're training to be a lawyer and a doctor respectively, and they just kind of have this rivalry. They've had some issues in the past, but you know, they have banter. They're not enemies, but they're just not friends. I said this in my reading vlog, I'll say it here. The first third of this book was really slow to start. I couldn't really get into it, whether that was me or the book, I'm not sure. It just wasn't for me. The second third of the book was chef's kiss, amazing, beautiful, perfect. Like literally wanted to read it all day. And then that last third, ooh, that last third had my blood boiling so bad. I had my blood pressure up here. I wanted to throw this book across the room. I was so happy when I turned the final page because of the miscommunication trope in this book. I was just like, by the time we got through that, I was like, I'm done. I don't want anything to, y'all can go away. Go away. I don't even want to read about you anymore. I don't care. This was ridiculous. This was a waste of time. I don't even know how a miscommunication trope done this badly got published. And I know that may sound harsh, but it is how I feel. Like, I truly don't understand. Like, all of this could have been avoided. The whole third act conflict could have been avoided so easily. None of it needed to happen. And I'm not going to say more than that. It really brought the book down, and it really made me hate the book. And I don't hate the book. That's harsh. It really brought the rating down. It was sitting at like a 3.5, closer to like 3.75. And then it just brought it all the way down to a 2.5. So Twisted Hate, we're done. I don't want to think about it anymore. And then of course I read Twisted Lies, which is the 4th and final book in the Twisted series. This book follows Stella and Christian. Stella is another best friend of the main character from the first book, and then Christian is kind of a mysterious billionaire figure who runs a security company who all the other characters go to for help in the last act when they need it desperately. And this is kind of like a grumpy sunshine-esque trope book. I like this book. I did. I had a good time with the book. I think I had 2 issues with it. First, the book is a little too long. It's pushing 550 pages, and the plot didn't warrant it. We didn't need all that. And second, I felt like I couldn't really get a handle on why these two characters liked each other. Like, actually, I could get why Stella liked Christian. I just couldn't get why Christian liked Stella. And when we found out why he was as obsessed with her as he was at the beginning of the book, I was like, okay. But I mean, it was fine. I mean, I read it pretty quickly. I enjoyed myself. I'm not gonna like sit here and say the book was bad. It wasn't. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I probably won't think about it again, but you know, the series is done. The series is done. We're good. And I can't wait to go back to my Kings of Sin series, which I much prefer, if I'm honest. So that was Twisted Lies by Anna Wong. If you want my full thoughts, they're in that vlog. All right, now I'm going to talk about the audiobook that I read because I kind of listened to it throughout the month, and that was An African History of Africa by Zainab Badawi. This is kind of a general history of Africa from before even humans were human, down through, I would say, probably the mid 20th century. Actually, no, it goes all the way up pretty much to present day. And I was interested in this book, first because I'm a history major, and second because I learned absolutely no African history beyond ancient Egypt in my entire 12 plus years of schooling. And then I took one college class and we learned about Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire, but then we're told that African history, that was pretty much all of African history, that we don't know that much outside of that one blip in time. Not true. Africa actually has a chunky history, and it's so interesting. And if you are interested in learning about African history and just getting like a basis of what it all entails, I would highly, highly recommend this book. That's what I went into this book for. That's what the author stated that she wanted to do with this book, and so I think this is a perfect start. I do agree, I saw another review that said it has some issues, that it relies a little bit too much on hearsay and presents it as historical fact, and I do agree to that in some extent, but I don't think it takes away from how much value this book has and how much knowledge it imparts and how impactful it was on my understanding of the world. One thing I think this book really shines in doing is showing how colonialism really impacted African nations. Like, I think all of us know that colonialism is bad. I think we've all known that for a long time, but I think that this book, especially in that latter half, really gives you a deeper and more nuanced understanding of why that is, and specific examples of how it impacted African nations up through modern day. I ended up giving this audiobook 4.5 stars. Very, very impactful and very enlightening for me. All right, the 7th book that I picked up in February was actually off my February TBR, so yay to that. And I picked it up because I had just finished Twisted Lies, and this was like my 3rd book in a row where I was like kind of just feeling very meh about the books. And so I wanted a book that I felt like was gonna make me feel something, and I was like, what better book than this? And that was One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. This is my first Olivia Blake book, and I've been wanting to try this author for a while, so I was really excited to pick it up. This is a Romeo and Juliet retelling. It's an urban fantasy set in modern day Manhattan. We're following two rival families, the Antonovas and the Fedorovs, and one day one commits a business crime against the other, and then the other retaliates, and then we just start this pattern of back and forth retaliation, and now we're forced to deal with all of their history, and there's romance thrown in there, and we're just following this rivalry to its conclusion. Like I said, I picked this book up wanting to feel something, and I kind of ended up feeling nothing for it at the end, and that was for 2 reasons. First, I feel like although the writing had some beautiful moments, the structure of the book made it really hard to connect to the characters. We're following a very large cast of characters, and each one of them has a POV, and we're talking like a few pages worth of their POV, and then we're switching to the next person and the next person and the next person, and then maybe we go back to them, and it's just this very back and forth thing across too many people, and it just made it hard to sink into any one character. On top of that, we're just kind of like thrown into the midst of this action-packed story. Like most books, you start off, you beginning, it's a little slower, we're laying a foundation. This one, no, you're in it immediately. We're going, we're off, like hold on, we're on the ride, we're not getting off. It's a lot, it's pretty jarring, and it just doesn't lend itself to deeply connecting with the characters, which I think is what I was kind of craving when I picked this book up. And then second of all, I feel like this book was kind of a confusing, which I should have expected going into an Olivia Blake book, because I feel like every time I've heard someone talk about an Olivia Blake book, they're like, you know what, I was kind of confused throughout this whole thing. I didn't really know what was going on, and I get it now. I didn't understand what was going on probably the latter half of this book. Like, I understood what was going on, obviously, but it just got so convoluted that I was like, wait, what the fuck? Why are we doing all of this? Wait, I feel like upon a reread, I would enjoy this book more than I did the first time reading it, but I'm probably not going to reread it. Like I said, I gave this book 3.5 stars. It's not that I think that this is objectively bad book. I think that a lot of people would enjoy this book. I just think that it wasn't for me, and the structure of it didn't lend itself to me and what I needed at the time. I will definitely read another Olivia Blake book. I just think maybe this one wasn't for me. And then finally, I read probably one of my favorite books of the month. This was the book that pulled me back from the brink of a reading slump, the book that just opened up a whole new genre for me, that changed the way that I wanted to read over the course of the year, and that was The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. Now, this is technically classed as a horror on Goodreads and Google. I didn't find it particularly scary. I found it mildly disgusting, but not scary. And I later learned that this book falls into the category of good for her fiction, which from my understanding is a category of fiction where women kind of liberate themselves from oppressive things, whether that be men or societal standards and gender roles and all of that, in unconventional or weird ways. This book is definitely that. This book is about a Korean American family. We have the mother, the daughter, the oldest daughter, Jiwon, and the youngest daughter, and the father. Now the father has just left. He's picked up his bags, he's left the house, he's gone to the side chick. Left the whole family in shambles, especially the mother. The mother is really, really struggling with this. She just is crumbling under the weight of the grief. In order to bond that grief, she goes and she gets a boyfriend. Now this boyfriend is terrible. He's awful. He's an Asian fetishizer. He's sexist. He's just like icky. He's gross in every way possible. And Jiwon, who is the oldest daughter, she's the daughter that we see the whole story through, starts to fantasize about eating his eyeballs. This book was so insane. It was the perfect length. It was the perfect pace. It had me gripped from start to finish. Every other page I was going, what the fuck? And then I was like, you know what? Good for her. I've been telling everyone in my life about this book, and everyone's kind of looked at me with like side eye, like, why are you reading stuff like that? They don't understand. They don't understand. So if you've read stuff like this and you have some recs for what I should read next, please put that in the comments because I want more. I want more. That was The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. All right, guys, that was the 8 books that I read in the month of February. I feel like I had a very mediocre reading month. The stats say differently, but I still feel like it was, for the most part, not the best reading month. It just redeemed itself in the end. So I'm kind of hoping for a more level reading month in March with some more consistently high ratings. Like, I don't want to be on the cusp of a reading slump in March. Like, I'm begging, I'm just pulling myself out of it now. So hopefully that's what we'll get. You're gonna see me read some of the books off my physical TBR in next week's video, which I'm gonna do a reading vlog, so stay tuned for that. And for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.